Okay, welcome everybody. It's a happy Wednesday here, and we have a special guest with us. Welcome to the Elevated Academy. This is a place for student athletes, parents, families, lovers of sport, and we strive to empower each of you to be the best you can be in everything you do. We focus on the complete athlete, mind, body, game, and life, and we want to help you take care of business both on and off the field. Today we have Dr. Gregory Dale on the show. Greg is the director of sports psychology and leadership program for Duke Athletics. In his sports psychology role, Greg provides consultations for both individual athletes, coaches, staff members, and teams. In addition, he provides team building services for the athletic teams and other units within the athletic department. He's also an author. He's written 4 books. And besides that, I've known Greg for a long time. He is a great person. And especially with what we're going through right now, we couldn't ask for a better person to have on the Elevate Academy than Dr. Greg Dale. Greg, welcome to the Elevate Academy.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I love what you're doing with this, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and not only that, but you're following up one of your coworkers at Duke, and John Danowski, and the other day. Yeah, well, he's great, and John and I grew up in the same hometown. Our families all know each other, and so he's a fantastic person. And the feedback that we got from his session was just off the charts. He's just he oozes leadership, and it's so much fun to have someone like him on. But I know these are crazy times, especially for you. Greg, as I said, Greg's also a professor at Duke, and he's in the middle of holding classes for his kids, and holding classes on a weekly basis with them, and working with them. So, how are you helping the athletes and coaches at Duke right now? It's almost like you're wearing these 2 different hats. You got to keep your professor hat on and keep doing what you normally been doing.
Right.
But then you also have to help all these athletes and coaches who just had their seasons canceled.
Yes. So, well, I really just try to be a resource for them. It's amazing. I'm as busy or busier now than I am during the regular year. And I think from a coaching perspective, the coaches now have a lot of time to spend working on their mental, helping their athletes with the mental approach to their sport. They also have a lot of time to focus on the culture piece of it now. So I'm meeting regularly with a lot of our teams, and obviously via Zoom here, and meeting with a lot of individual athletes, meeting with the coaches, just trying to be a resource for them to try to help them navigate this thing. I did a thing for all of our coaches yesterday when we brought them together, and the title of it was Navigating a Pandemic. I mean, nobody ever tells you how to do that when you're going to school to try to be a coach, or nobody ever has that in their coaching philosophy or their realm of how to be a coach. So it's interesting times for everybody, but I'm really just trying to be a resource for them and give them some food for thought about how to navigate all this.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that Coach Danowski said, he said about you specifically, he said, I think Greg has actually spoken in every single state in the United States. And my comment to him was going to be, which I never got it out. I was like, well, I bet you he's never spoken about how to overcome a pandemic.
That's exactly right. Yeah, look, I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to speak in, like you said, all 50 states now, and in several places around the world, and really just trying to help people. I love what you do here with parents and coaches and kids and just people in general, trying to help elevate them in life and hopefully help them have a positive impact on other people along the way. And that's kind of my purpose in life. And I'm very fortunate that I get to do that at Duke and then other places around. So when I go, John, he and I get together, he's always asking me, so where you been? And we have a little tradition now that I bring him something from someplace, whether it's in Thailand, I bring him an elephant or a surfboard from Hawaii, or wherever I had a chance to go, I bring him that, and we have some good stories and good fun around that.
Oh, I bet. He's a great one. And one of the things we were talking about, you mentioned the word culture.
Yes.
And the importance of culture. And when John came into Duke after the Duke scandal in 2006, culture and how this team was going to respond was going to be crucial to their success. And in less than 4 years of him being there, he won a national championship in 2010. Talk a little bit about culture, not only just with the lacrosse team, but
Yeah.
the culture that Duke. I mean, when you think of Duke athletics, you literally think of one of the best athletic programs in the country.
Yes.
So talk about the culture.
Yeah. So there's a great thing that the culture leads strategy for lunch every day, and I think it's going to eat it for breakfast and dinner and everything else. And one of the things that separates the great coaches from everyone else is their willingness and ability to spend time on culture. And John, because we've been talking about him, is phenomenal with that and actually takes a lot of pride in it and really values it. And so I'm continually trying to get coaches to think about, if the culture that you have on the teams that you coach is going to eat whatever strategy that you have, then why wouldn't we spend more time on it? And when you think about the culture at Duke overall in the athletic department, well, I'm very proud to say that I'm affiliated with Duke Athletics, and because we truly take a lot of pride in trying to do it the right way. And we really try to balance the academic and athletic piece. And, we can get a certain type of kid that can come to Duke. Not everybody can come here. I know everybody says that about their place, but
Sure.
it truly is that way. And our coaches are, they're held to a high standard. And if you're going to be at Duke, you're not going to cut corners. We're not going to have all these violations on a regular basis. You're going to do things the right way. And that makes me very proud of the fact that we take a lot of pride in our overall organizational culture in the athletic department. And then coaches like John, Coach K, those guys spend a lot of time working on their culture, and I think it makes a difference for them.
Well, I think it's very important for everyone to know that you're not talking about me as Coach K. You're talking about Mike Krzyzewski.
Yeah, well, both of you. Yeah, that's right.
I'm Coach K lacrosse, but we're talking about Mike Krzyzewski here.
Right. Yeah. Right.
I think it's got to be. You have to be, if you want to be a national champion, you have to have a Polish ancestry, and you got to coach at Duke.
No kidding, right? I mean, it's amazing. Polish, Catholic, coach at Duke, man, you're going to be okay. I think you got it one step up on everybody for sure.
Well, it's very interesting. I happened to be reading something recently about Mike Krzyzewski and Duke, and how early on in his career, it was so much about his way of how he wanted to do things, his culture of setting that up. And in the beginning, it took him a while, and he didn't have immediate success. But the thing I loved about it, it's very similar to John Wooden not having, all of his success early on in his career, that it took time. So that culture, it's not something you can just switch in a day. It takes time to people to buy in. Do you believe in that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Culture, it takes an incredible amount of effort. It's something that needs to be nurtured and fed and on a regular basis. And that's one of the things that I think separates, again, Coach K from everybody else, is that he's willing to and values the idea of the culture piece. Look, I think John Danowski, Coach K, they would both admit that you have to have really talented players. Talented players absolutely 100% make a difference. And I don't care how great you are with a culture, if you don't have some level of talent to be able to compete with whoever you're competing against, it makes it tough, obviously. But the culture piece is the one thing that can help put you over the edge. And you've probably experienced yourself as a coach or a former player and running leagues in different where you've seen teams that maybe didn't have as much talent as everyone else, but boy, everyone was bought in. Everyone truly and cared about each other and had one vision in mind, and we're bought into what we're trying to do here. And when you can have that and you combine that with talent, it's amazing. Both of those guys coached at the highest level, coaching Coach K in the Olympics and Coach Danowski with our national team, and taking those guys to a world championship recently and going to coach them again. And the things that they do with their players in terms of helping break down barriers and helping them at the highest level buy into, it's not about me, it's not about brand, it's about the United States, it's about our program, it's about us, and getting grown men to put their egos aside and to be vulnerable with each other and to open up and to break down some of those barriers, it's awesome. And I'm telling you, it makes a difference. And some coaches, it's easier for some coaches than others to be willing to do that. But even if it's not something that you're comfortable with, I think you got to challenge yourself to do that and to spend time on it. And one last thing I'll say about that is that Kotowski really models this idea of vulnerability, that being vulnerable, a lot of times we look at that as a weakness, but anyone who's ever seen any of Brene Brown around and all the research she's done around vulnerability, when we think about courage, we think strength, right? And vulnerability is a weakness. But I would argue, like she said, nothing you ever do in life that's considered to be courageous, you can't be courageous if you're not being somewhat vulnerable. And John models that for his kids. I don't know if he talked to you about that, but every year the freshmen come in, he kind of tells them his story. He talks about where he came from and how he grew up on Long Island and all the different people that had an influence in his life and why he does the things that he does and he makes the decisions that he makes. And I would tell you, by modeling that, that helps those guys know that it's okay to do that amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And, from the beginning, they learn that it's okay to do that. And when you can be vulnerable with each other, get to know each other at a different level, you create that, what we call that brotherhood or that sisterhood. And look, you might get lucky as a coach and it might happen. I'll say the best ones are very deliberate in trying to create that kind of culture.
Well, you know what? It's interesting because even for myself, it's been, something that I have probably shied away from. And only in the last few years have I been more vulnerable as a coach with my players and, letting them know my background and where I've come from. And because it's hard, but, I remember when the whole Penn State scandal came out with Sandusky, and one of my former coaches from Brown, who was a graduate assistant at the time at Penn State, he was one of the first ones to come out about it. And we talk about being vulnerable, Matt Packness, and Matt's a great guy, and Matt actually teaches a class on bullying, both at the corporate level and school level. But Matt came out and was completely vulnerable. And it was, for me, it was eye-opening because I was like, I always held Matt up here as both a coach, as a great former player, a tough guy. And I'm like, I think I love him even more now.
Right. Yes.
Seeing him vulnerable.
Yes.
And
right. You have a different appreciation for him now, right? You have a different level for him, for his willingness to be able to do that.
And also, look, he was willing to speak out when no one else was.
Yes. Yeah. And that's huge vulnerability. No doubt. And again, many coaches feel like that you can't, that if you do that, you're showing weakness and that you can't do that. Sometimes we feel like we need to keep a distance between us and the players. And again, I'm not saying that you're buddies with them or hanging out and drinking with them and that kind of stuff. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, sure.
But both of those, I'm talking about Coach K and Coach Kotowski, both of them have over to their house for dinner, for instance, and they one at a time or in small groups. And John takes each class and they go to a local Whole Foods and they, have a dessert together, and just to get to know them at a different level and start to break down some of that barrier. And I think what they're doing is they're creating what I call emotional equity with people. One of John's assistants, Ron Caputo, and I talk a lot about this idea of emotion.
I love Ronnie Caputo, by the way. Ronnie's a great guy. We used to play a lot of summer lacrosse together.
Yes, great coach, and we talk a lot, and he gets it. And I would tell you, his guys love playing for him. But we talk about emotional equity, that you have to build that up with people anytime, any leadership position that you're in, and that if you don't have that, and that means that they know that you care about them. They know that you're coming from a place that's in their best interest. It's not about you. And if you build that up, and being somewhat vulnerable allows you to do that. If you can do that, when you do have to challenge them, when you do have to push them, when you do have to call them out on something, they're going to be more likely to take that the right way because they trust that you're coming from a good place.
Right.
Because you've taken the time to build that emotional equity with that.
I love it. I mean, it's something that, I wrote down the term as you were saying it. I wrote down emotional equity. I'm like, that is powerful in the words and powerful in the meaning. And I love that. Talk about power. You and I had this conversation recently this past summer, but the first time I ever got to meet Greg was he was giving a speech at the Bryan All-American Games too, and it was awesome because it was all the players. There were probably 600 kids at least that were there, and I think most everyone had at least one parent or two parents there, and you talked about the relationship of athletes and their parents, and I remember this to a T. And so here we are, this huge situation, probably 1,000 people. And as Greg was saying this, I'm like, oh my God, is he looking right at me? Is he saying this right to me right now? But what you said was, you asked all the athletes, said, hey, listen, you just played a tough game. You battled out on the field and you get in the car. How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you get so excited when your parents want to talk about that game as soon as you get in the car? And I was like, oh my God, I do that.
Yep.
But that hit home with me. And you talked about the importance of being a great sport parent. Talk a little bit about that to the listeners.
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm a parent myself, so when I talk to parents, I'm really trying to help remind myself about this stuff too. I think the overwhelming majority of us have our hearts in the right place. We want to do what's best for our children, and I think we are much more involved in our kids' lives than our parents ever were, for the most part. Probably any generation before us, we are very involved in their lives. We give up our weekends. We stay in crappy hotels. We eat crappy food, helping our kids chase their dreams and giving up parts of our life to do that. So at some level, I think if we're honest, kids have become commodities at some level, that we're investing in you because I hope to get a return on that investment someday, that partial scholarship to somewhere, wherever you might get a chance to go play lacrosse in this case, because we were talking about that. And I believe that parents play a huge role in the success of their kids, obviously, and the experience that they have. And so what I try to do is give parents some food for thought in an all shucks kind of way. We try to laugh a little bit, but also maybe try to hit them between the eyes. I love the fact that with all those people there, you felt like that one piece was speaking to you. And that's ultimately my goal. And I think that in and around competition, I just think it's really important to the role that we play as parents. And that a good friend of mine who used to coach his kid when he was younger, his kid's like a sophomore, junior now, but I used to coach him when he was younger. And by the way, if you coach your own kid out there, we typically harder on our own kids than everybody else. I know guys in the NFL, for instance, that don't talk to their dads today because their dads didn't know how to separate being dad and being coach. And they pushed them all the time and didn't know.
I've done it too.
Right.
I raised my hand. I've done it.
Yes. Right. I've coached my kids. And if you think about it, there's nobody out there that's more of a reflection on you than that kid. And when we come home, we're not talking to everybody else's kid, we're talking to our kid, right? And we have that extra time with them, and we have to learn how to separate being parent and being coach. And so when you come home, it's got to be your dad now. Or when you take that whistle off, your dad. And when you put the whistle on, you're their coach, and you're not their dad or their mom. And it's really hard to do that, but you got to make a conscious decision to do that. I think you also got to communicate with your kid, and do they still enjoy having you as their coach? And if not, then I realize if you're coaching them at the school, then you probably can't say, I'm going to go get a job somewhere else. But
right.
You need to continually talk with your kid and with how you're doing with that piece of it. I'm fortunate to have been on an advisory board for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and I had a chance to go to some of their inauguration events where they induct people into the Hall of Fame. I was there when Brett Favre was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. Here's a guy who's 55 years old at the time and a grandfather, and he's standing up there. He talked forever, by the way. He had a really long speech, but was great. And he talked about his dad. His dad was his high school football coach. And his dad, as we all know, many of you know, that he passed away and when he was a professional football player. But he went on to talk about his dad and said, you know, my dad never once told me I was good enough. And it pushed me, but he kind of paused and he started crying. And he looks up into heaven and he says, gosh, Dad, I hope you think I'm good enough now. And here's a guy who's going in the Hall of Fame, one of the best of all time, and he's still not quite Dad thinks he's good enough, right? And to me, there's a fine line between pushing your kid and challenging them and being there for them, but also being supportive and listening to them.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I remember you saying, and I tell this to parents now all the time, I said, you know, let us be coaches. Let us coach them. You have to trust us as coaches. And the one thing that I want you to do when you get in the car, and this is exactly what you said to, and I'm going to say you said it to me,
yes.
to everyone, but you did say it to me, was I loved watching you play today. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and there's some great organizations out there that are really promoting that idea. And I've been a big
Positive Coaching Alliance is a huge one. Can't say enough good things about them.
Yes, that's right. So getting back to that guy that was his son's coach, he didn't know. Here's what he does when before he goes to play. The last thing he says to him, or the only thing he says to him, is go have fun with your teammate. He doesn't say, "Hey, get me this. Make sure you do this. Make sure you do that."
Hey, Greg, you got frozen for a second, so just go back to that. You're talking about that guy's connection.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay.
So he said that, he used to coach his kid, but now the last thing he says to him before he leaves to go compete is go have fun with your friends, go have fun with your teammates. He doesn't say, hey, make sure you do this, make sure you dodge this way, make sure you do this, make sure you get me this, whatever. Go have fun with your teammates.
Right.
Competition, this is a big one, doesn't coach him from the sidelines. Another question, I don't know if you remember when I was with all you guys, I asked, how many of you love it if mom or dad continually coach you from the sidelines? You know, we got 1,000 kids. We have one or two that raise their hand. Nobody, we're more of a distraction than we are a help when we coach them from the sidelines. And so that guy, my friend, I'm there, I'm supporting him, I'm encouraging him, but I'm not coaching him from the sidelines. It's hard sometimes because I want to do that as a coach. It's kind of in my nature to do that.
Right.
And it's kind of like parents, if we were to go to dinner and listen to the conversation at that table, listen to that table, and listen to the conversation at your table all at the same time, how might that go for you? Well, that's what it's like for your kid. Try to perform, listen to the coach, and listen to you all at the same time.
Right. Well, Abby Wambach, you know, her wife came out with a great, something on Twitter a couple of years ago where she had a picture of Abby on the sidelines of their daughters, like whatever, their 9-year-old daughter's game. And she said, if my wife, who's one of the greatest soccer players in the world, can sit here on the sideline and be quiet, you can too.
Yes, that's awesome. I love that. That's exactly right. And, Abby had her chance, so that's probably easier for her because she's not living as vicariously through her kid and hoping that her kid can achieve those dreams. And so from the I'll get to the after the game here in a second, but I want to add one more thing about like during it. Try whenever we get back to whatever normal looks like for us and your kids in that first season, as a parent, try not to use any verbs when you watch your kid play. Just watch your kid. No verbs, right? Because the verbs are pass, shoot, run, and lacrosse. I'm convinced that wheels is a verb. Wheels. I'm convinced that's a verb. Just positive edge. Hey, great shot. Way to run. Great dodge. Great job doing that, right? Let the coaches coach them. After it's over, this is a tough one. And as you were talking about, that event that you were talking about, I remember driving up to that event and there was a game that had just finished and there were 3 different kids walking away with their dad. All these, in this case, were dads. And their dads were with them and they were right in their ear. And you could tell they were giving them the number right after the game was over. 3 different places. And you could tell in the body language of those kids, that was the last place in the world they wanted to be right there in that moment. Right. Listening to dad give me the third degree about why I did this and what was I thinking when I did that and why do I do this. And
You know what's amazing is we were coaching. I was coaching a game one time, and it was a big tournament, and we were playing against some really heavy competition, and we had just won I think a quarterfinal game, and it was a really good game. And one of the top coaches from Carolina was on the sideline watching the game, and one of the parents came up to me, and I saw him, and I could just tell we just won, but he was pissed off.
okay.
And I'm like, what's the matter? He's like, ugh, she played terrible. She didn't do anything. I can't even believe, it's such an opportunity. You got these coaches watching. I said, you know what's interesting? You know what the Carolina coach just said to me about your daughter? He said, man, she moves like Barry Sanders. Her lateral movement is incredible. Her footwork is incredible. He didn't care about goals and assists. He talked about her as an athlete.
Yep.
And that's what you have to remember is what are these coaches looking for? We asked John Donowski the other day. He said, what are you looking for in your players?
Yep.
And he talked about coachability, the willingness to compete, that, someone's that self-starter. I sent out a survey to 100, I got back from 130 college coaches on ranking the top attributes that they're looking for in kids.
Yeah.
No one said goals and assists. No one's saying that. So I think that's important when you're as a parent watching, and you're thinking about the stressors, you're paying money for this, you're going to this tournament, but what are coaches looking for?
That's exactly right. And I think we got to continue to try to educate parents about that I would also argue that coaches are watching, if they're watching your kid, they have a pretty good indication your kid's pretty talented. So they're watching what kind of athlete they are, but as John said, their coachability. So in the huddle, are they looking at them? Or when they're not playing well, what's their body language look like? And if they come off the field, are they listening to their coach when they coach them? And how are they handling it when they don't play well or their team's not playing well?
Right.
How do you handle that? I want to know because we're doing that. And I would tell you now, college coaches are recruiting the family as much as they are the kids. If mom and dad are whack jobs, and mom and dad are the ones that are yelling and screaming all the time, and they get from the club coach that the parents are whack, they're thinking about, do I want to?
I asked them that question as well of the college coaches. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how will a parent's negative behavior on the sidelines affect the ability to recruit that kid? 89% of them said it would negatively affect them recruiting that kid going forward.
Yes. 89%.
89.
Yeah. So, yes. So they're not looking at the goals. They're not looking at all the statistics. They're looking at those intangibles. And your kid's in control of a lot of that stuff. Her body language, her movement, how hard she works. Is she competitive? What's her body language like when she's not playing well? But and I know it's a long-winded answer.
I love it.
No
this is huge. And you know what? I'm telling you right now, this is like, of all the sessions that we've done so far, I think this is the one that could have the most impact on families.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. So getting back to this guy, after he watches his kid play, then after it's over, when he sees him, they do the fist bump. They used to hug when he was younger, but now, do the fist bump thing. And then he says, hey, I love seeing you play. I love watching you out there with your teammates, whether the kid played or didn't play. And then I love this piece. He says, do you want me to be your coach right now, or you just want me to be dad right now? And when the kid says, I just want you to be dad, I don't want to talk about it, they don't talk about it. He leaves him alone. And he says, Greg, I got to be honest. We're in that car and I'm grabbing that steering wheel and thinking, man, I want to say something right now, but because I know what I want to say, but I don't. And he said, you know what? It's improved our relationship. And he said, we always come back and talk about it.
Right.
It's more on his time. I'm less emotional. He's certainly less emotional. And he'll come to me and say, so what do you think? And I've told him that if you come and ask me what you think, I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to do it in a loving way, but I'm going to not sugarcoat it and say, hey, you did this,
right,
but you got to get better at this. But if you think about it, I think if we make kids talk to us right after it's over, it's more about us than it is about them.
Right. You're not asking their permission.
That's right. It's selfish. And so I encourage parents, ask your kid when they don't perform well, when they've had that and they've played or they've competed, what do they need from you? And I think you got to honor that.
Well, I can tell you, this is an interesting one. I just talked about this the other day with a friend of mine. We were playing in a tournament, and we have a pretty standard rule. If we're playing in a tournament that has championship implications, in the last 2 to 3 minutes of a game, if it's a 1 or 2 goal game, the 12 best players are going to be on the field. Otherwise, we just keep it even by everyone.
Okay.
And we're going to put the 12 best girls on the field at that point in time.
Yeah.
So I had moved one of our kids who was one of our okay midfielders, but she was an incredible defender. I said to her, I need you back on defense. We got to win this game right here. Otherwise, we don't go to the playoffs. I'm putting you on defense. We set it up, put her in and everything. And we ended up winning the game. And then after the game, a couple of the moms said, "You are in trouble." And I'm like, "What?" They're like, "Oh, so-and-so's mom is furious with you right now." And I look and I just see her literally heading at me. And she's heading at me, and her whole body language is she's going to just tear into me. And right when she gets to me and she's about to say, like, what the heck was that about? Her daughter runs up and goes, "Mom, did you see that Dave put me in the last 2 minutes of the game, that he thought that I was one of the best 12? He goes, and we won the game." She's like, "I love playing defense. How great was that?" And it just went, yes. The mom couldn't say anything after that.
Yes.
And this kid was so happy, but the mom wasn't, because she wasn't on the offensive side of the game.
That's right. Yeah. And again, her daughter in that situation just loved being out there on the field when it counted, and that you trusted her enough to do that. And again, as parents, it's hard for us to see that sometimes. Sometimes kids are even okay with not being out there. They'd rather be on the bench in that moment, and that's okay. I mean, obviously we want them to be out there, but sometimes, well, not sometimes, all the time, we got to think about and talk to our kids about what was their experience, and see if she would have taken the time at some point to do that and let herself cool off.
Right.
She would have learned that. That's another thing I talk about. Number one, you should not go talk to the coach. You should let your child talk to the coach if there's an issue. Starting in 6th grade, so 12 years old, we should not be advocating for our kids. We need to let them advocate for themselves. And if it's still after that, you're not satisfied, then okay, maybe you can go do that, but you need to wait 24 hours. You need to give it some time before you go and talk to that coach, because you're going to, and particularly in that case, she would have totally regretted that. Probably would have had to come and apologize to you at some point, because of she was emotional and didn't let the whole thing play out.
We have a 24-hour rule. She was just going to ignore it. So,
she's going to destroy that, right?
It didn't matter,
Right.
The 24-hour rule is for everyone else.
That's right.
Which is, it's unfortunate, but one of the things too is I always loved about the stuff that you do is you talk about when players make mistakes. And you almost having a routine for what happens when you do make mistakes. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's Dave, it's really easy to be mentally tough when everything's going your way, right? When you're playing lights out, you're scoring goals, you're shutting people down, whatever it is, whatever sport you're in, when everything's going your way, it's easy to be mentally tough. Have a great attitude, be mentally strong. But what are you like when the stuff hits the fan, when it's not going well? And let's think about it. That's probably, we struggle more often than we do play perfectly. You're not in the zone very often. So how do you handle that? Says a lot about your character, says a lot about your mental toughness. And so I'm very much a big believer in that you can train yourself to respond differently to when you make mistakes. And I just want to add a little piece into there about this right now is a great time to work on your mental game as an athlete.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have you can't work as much on it physically. And a lot of times when during the season or during practice, people say, I don't have time to work on it. Well, we have nothing but a lot of time for a lot of us now. So it's a perfect time. So to help with that, you ought to go watch video of yourself. Go get some film clips of you and watch yourself playing well, but you need to also look at those situations where you didn't perform well and watch and see what was your body language like? How did you respond when you weren't playing well? If I was in the audience, could I be able to see that you were playing differently when you weren't performing well? And so I think that you can start to imagine yourself in those situations and imagine yourself having a different response when it happens again.
Right.
And it's different for everyone. Sometimes I don't handle it well when I'm not playing well, or when I make several mistakes in a row. And as a goalie, I let the first goal in. I can't tell you how many times goalies have said, boy, if I can save that first one, boy, it's going to be a good game. If I don't save the first one, I know it's probably not going to go well. Well, should be no correlation between whether you save that first one and how you play the rest of the game. There shouldn't be. If you're mentally tough, there isn't going to be a correlation between those two. So when you talk about routine, it is important. And so for most sports, not all, but most, I have what I call the 3-second rule. And if you're thinking about, and it's somewhat arbitrary, but if you're thinking about a mistake for more than 3 seconds, as an athlete during a competition, you're not being mentally tough. 1001, 1002, 1003. That's what you can give yourself. And during that time, your body language is huge. Just like we talked about what college coaches are looking for.
Yeah.
If I'm your opponent and I see you're hanging your head, if I see you dropping your shoulders, if I see you have negative body language, if I'm competitive at all, it totally gives me an advantage, totally motivates me, elevates me just a little bit. If I'm one of your teammates, I'm having to come take some energy out of what I'm trying to focus on and go and build you up and help you feel better about yourself. And I would say don't do either one of those. Mental toughness is to be struggling and not let anybody see that you're struggling. That's mental toughness. Sometimes
Right.
people want to put on a show and let everybody know that they're struggling or they're disappointed in themselves because they want people to know they can do better. That's not mental toughness. That's just that you're putting on a show. And I would say be careful about doing that. So I would say I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's interesting what you said, because when we were talking to a lot of the college coaches about, things that they look for, one of the things that they also had ranked very highly was, how does this player overcome mistakes on the field? What do they do?
That's right.
Do they erase the mistake by going out and making the next play?
Mm-hmm.
Do they slam their stick? Do they hang their head? Do they droop their shoulders? Do they walk off? The coach calls a timeout, everyone runs in the huddle, and they're the last one in the huddle because they're still focused on the play that they just made. So all of those things that go into it. But, I remember you talking about, having a routine, whether you flush it or, you brush it off, one or the other,
Yes.
just get it off and be done with it.
That's right. And so in that 3 seconds, you can say what you want to say, but you can't let anybody see you're struggling. And then you need to do something physical to kind of let it go. And I know it sounds silly, but there are professional athletes I work with that do the 2-finger thing. I got this from a friend of mine who coached or worked in Major League Baseball. And but you flush it. You just take your 2 fingers and you flush. You don't hold it up where everybody can see it. Maybe you just do it right down here to your side, or like you just swipe here, or you release it down here to your side. You snap your finger. Do something physical to let it go. And then you got to talk to yourself and focus on what's coming next. And what I would say is, what would you say to one of your teammates after a mistake? You would say, hey, you got this. You're going to be fine. Keep your head up. Focus on the next play. Well, that's what you got to do with yourself. We're sometimes our own worst enemies. And I'm not saying don't make up things that aren't true. You're an amazing athlete today. But how would you talk to one of your good friends on the team? You're somebody you respect. You would say, hey, you got this, you're going to be fine. That is mental toughness, if you can learn how to do that. And now is a great time to start to imagine yourself in those types of situations and handling it differently when it starts to happen again, when you get back to playing.
Well, one of the viewers had a question for you. They said, do you think there's a difference between motivating girls versus motivating boys?
Yes, there is. In my experience, you can say one thing to a group of boys one way, and you could say the exact same thing to a group of girls, and they might take it differently. Girls tend to internalize things a little bit. Again, I'm talking about my experience. They take it a little more personally. Guys, most of the time are saying, he's not talking to me. Right? He's talking about somebody else. He's not talking to me. He's talking to that guy over there. Girls on themselves, particularly like in that teenage years. They are much more self-critical, much struggle a little more with confidence. Boys are, they got confidence overflowing. Sometimes it's too much and it's false confidence, but he could be the scrawniest kid in school and he's looking in the mirror thinking, man, I look jacked today. Look how good I looked. And the girls seeing something very different. So
Jenny Levy and I had a conversation about this. She coaches, Team USA,
yeah, of course,
UNC,
yeah.
and Jenny said, there is a big difference. She said, she goes, and she was talking about Coach Brushy at Duke and at UNC, and she says,
Yeah.
Brushy might have a kid who's the fourth string defensive midi who's sitting on the bench going, I'm better than that kid who's out on the field right now. I should be on the field. And she goes, and I might have a first team All-American who's saying, I don't even deserve to be out here right now.
Yes.
And I remember when I first started coaching, and I forget who said it to me, but this quote has always lived with me. They said, boys feel good when they play well. Girls need to feel good in order to play well.
Yes. And that's exactly right. It's a great way a very succinct way to say that. I've heard that too, but I think it's very appropriate. So if you're coaching kids, if you're a parent of a girl, and I think you got to be really more cognizant of how you say things to them, what you say and how you, and I'm not saying that girls aren't, I'm not saying that, and listen, many girls are much tougher than I was. And look, they go through things in life that we men handle. I get that, but emotionally, just know that they're going to take things, they're going to internalize those things. And the first thing they're going to do is turn it into a negative thing inwardly. And that I'm not as good or whatever that might be, that it's going to be much more of a negative thing for them.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's one of the things too, I love about, you also referenced this just a second ago. One of the things that Positive Coaching Alliance talks about is our emotional tanks, that we all have emotional tanks. And it's just like gasoline in a car. Your tank gets low, and if it gets too low, you're dealing with the sludge at the bottom of the tank, and you're not going to perform well. Well, one of the roles that great leaders on great teams do is they make everyone around them better.
Yes.
And what we want them to do is help fill each other's emotional tanks and be on the lookout right now. Be on the lookout for your teammates who maybe are going through a tough time. I told all my kids, I said, last Thursday I had a giant pity party for myself. And I was having just a really bad day. And it was one of those days where it was just a tough day. And I cried and I got through it. But, it's okay. You're going to see your friends and teammates having days like that. That's great people help pick those people up, though.
Yeah, no question. I think, great leaders make people around them better. Great teammates make people around them better. And to your point, we should be looking to help see how we can help fill each other's emotional tanks. And that's one of the things that makes us feel better in our own situation if we can do something good for somebody else. There's a lot of research showing that when you do something nice for someone else, you open the door for them, or you send them an email out of the blue, or you call someone, or you look and see somebody struggling and you're working and focusing on helping them and knowing that you made a difference for people. That not only does it help them, but it also helps us, particularly in times like this. So absolutely, it's really important.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the whole value of paying it forward. I was lucky enough. I had a mentor, my first real mentor ever at Brown, and he happened to be an amazing mentor, Thomas Watson Jr. He was the CEO and chairman of IBM at the time. Oh, wow. And I had won the Watson Scholarship to Brown, and he wanted to meet me because I wrote him a 2-page thank you note of what that scholarship meant to me. Yeah. And this was a guy who literally was like a real mentor to me, where, I saw him as an adult and I'd go to his office and talk. And one time he gave me a piece of advice, and it wasn't what I was looking for, but it was the truth. Mm-hmm. And I had a tough time swallowing it. And he said to me, he said, listen, I could tell you what you want to hear. I could tell you what's going to be the best thing for you. He goes, if that's what you want from me, that's what I'm going to give you. Yeah. And then he said, he goes, when you're struggling on the ladder of life and you don't know how to get up to the next rung, that's when you have to have faith, take a hand off that ladder, reach it up, and someone's going to pull you up. And as
Yeah.
soon as that person pulls you up to the next rung,
Yep.
reach down below them and
Yes.
grab the next person and pull them up with you.
That's awesome.
And it's like, oh God, when he said that to me, I
Yeah.
literally turned to him. I go, it's like a chain of hands. And he goes, yeah,
Yes.
chain of hands. That's what it's all
In a
about.
hand. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah.
Uh,
Very
just
good.
amazing stuff. You've worked with, obviously, you're working with people like Mike Krzyzewski and Coach Danowski, and, look what the new Duke football program. I mean, Duke was, now it's on the, national forefront of being one of the top teams. So you've had this opportunity to work with all these. Has there been any like leaders that you've worked at who've really just like stood out, and you've had the opportunity, like you can almost like smile and go, wow, that person's a great leader. I've really helped them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very fortunate to get to work with a lot of people who are very successful at what they do. And I would say I learn as much from them as they learn from me. And in those interactions that I have with them, I'm trying to be a sponge and trying to get as much from them. And I would, that's hard for me to say, because I would just say that I've learned as much from them. And I just hope in some small way I've had an impact and gotten them to think about what they do and how they do things. And again, I think because I have a chance to do that, and I'm a coach at heart. I used to coach early in my career. That's how I got my start. I was a teacher and a coach, and I just really have a passion for trying to help anybody in a leadership position be able to have that impact. And what's fine for me is when I get coaches to start to value this idea that the relationship I have with them is going to make a difference,
Right.
and it's really going to be meaningful. I do a coaches roundtable where we bring our coaches together at Duke, and Tony Dungy's recently come out with a book about this, and I haven't read that book yet, but I got this, and I think that people want to belong to something where they feel valued and that they feel like it has a soul to it, S-O-U-L. And I just really think that's very powerful, is getting coaches to think Coach Cutcliffe, Coach Danowski, Coach K, those guys are creating cultures and situations that have souls to them, that people want to belong to, that people feel valued, people want to be a part of it and are buying into it. And so when I get people to that light bulb to go on for them there, it's very satisfying for me, because I believe how many athletes, how many people will that have an impact on?
Yeah, it's like a coaching tree. Look at what you're doing.
That's exactly right. And I get a chance to do a decent amount in the corporate world, and it's the same stuff that I talk with coaches about. I'm talking with corporate CEOs and corporate executives about. It's the same stuff. It's about people.
Yeah, and especially in this day, in this environment, what we're going through. I say it all the time. When I was at Merrill Lynch, Lonnie Steffens, who was our president, he said the most valuable asset that we have at Merrill Lynch are the people who go up and down these elevators every day that fill our offices. Yes. And it's something that we all have to recognize right now. It's not just, it is the people, but it's the people around you. It's your neighbors. It's your family, all those things. It's like, this is, you talk about having a reset athletically. We're having a reset globally right now. And and I just hope people come out of the other side of this and we don't go back to, the crazy head down, ignoring everyone, just focused on yourself. And that's it. I hope we come through this.
I hope. History shows that we'll not do that for a while, but unless we make a conscious decision to do that, after a few weeks, months, whatever, we'll be right back to the grind and doing our thing, and complaining about all the things that are going wrong and all the things that we take for granted, all the things that we miss right now. A conscious decision not to do that, we'll fall right back into that cycle.
Yeah.
I hope we really try to, as a species, I hope we try to do better with that and make that last a little bit longer.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I want to talk a little bit more just specific to athletes for a second,
Yeah.
because we got a lot of athletes that, are
Yeah.
watching this and will watch the replay. Um, I saw, and I'm trying to think who it was. It doesn't really matter. It was a professional football player. I think he was a linebacker, and a reporter asked him a question. I think a coach got in his face and was screaming at him during the game, and he looked at the reporter and he said, "Are you kidding me?" He goes, "This is professional football." He goes, "You know what I've taught myself is I don't listen to the tone. I listen to the words. I'm listening to what he's saying to me, because he wouldn't be telling me this if there wasn't a reason for him to tell me this." And I was like, wow, that's pretty powerful, because I think a lot of times as coaches, what do we want to do as coaches? Now, listen, there are some bad coaches out there who shouldn't be coaching. That's fact. But most coaches, most of them, we want to get the most out of the kids that we're coaching, want to get the most out of our players. We all want to win and stuff like that. So, how can you help athletes to be able to say, listen to the message and not the tone?
Yeah. So I think that takes emotional maturity. Obviously, that guy's been, and he's got the emotional maturity to distinguish between what he's saying and how he's saying it. What's the message here? So you have to try to train yourself to do that. And look, I just think there are coaches. I think there's a difference between intense and emotional as a coach. And maybe you as an athlete can think about that too. Is he just being emotional and venting right now? Then that's different than he's intense. It's important. She cares about what we're doing right now, and she's trying to help me learn how to do this better. That's different. Emotional is when we just vent things that we might regret. And there are some coaches that let the emotional piece get the best of them. So look, this coach is intense, but it's because they care, because this is important. We've worked really hard for this. They want me to, and they want us to be.
Yeah, I know. I mean, one of our guests,
Those two things. Maybe that might help you a little bit.
yeah, I mean, one of our guests said that the other day. They said, if the coach isn't literally, if they stop coaching you,
Mm-hmm.
you really might have an issue there, because maybe they've given up on you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because
And I would say, yes, and I would say some coaches, and again, I think the bad ones use that as an excuse that I yell at everybody. But you can coach people and coach them pretty hard, but not be emotional about it.
right.
And so I don't think you should ever apologize for being intense as a coach, because that means, again, you care. This is important. We worked hard for this. And as an athlete, if he's coaching you, they believe in you, they care about you, they're trying to help you get better. If they're not, you're right, they might have given up on you.
Yeah, it's this is awesome. You've done just an unbelievable job, and this is just hugely valuable. Every time I talk to you, I get takeaways. It's like my page here just filled with notes of stuff that I get from you. So I appreciate that so much. As we end up, we always have three questions. So the three questions that we have, the first question is from our prior guest. So Coach Kotowski, and this is it's an interesting question, even the way he phrased it. He said he wanted to know, of all that you've met so many coaches, worked with so many coaches, he goes, how many coaches as a percentage really get it? How many get it?
Yeah, I think unfortunately there's not as many as I'd like to think. I like to think that every time I go speak to a group of coaches, they all get it and they're all going to go out and that. But maybe, I don't know, maybe half. I think if I could give it a percentage, I'd say, and that's probably because the stuff I talk about is the art of coaching and leadership and all that. So I'd say anywhere 40 to 50%, maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, our next guest, who you're going to now ask a question of, is a good friend of mine, Shaun Moran. And Shaun was captain of the basketball team at Brown. They ended up that year going to the NCAAs. They lost to Syracuse in the Dome. But what Shaun's coming on to talk about is really his career and how sports has affected his career. Most recently, he was head of ad sales for all of Viacom.
Yeah.
Had leadership positions in MTV and VH1, and he's done some really cool stuff, but he's a great person. So what's the question that Greg Dale wants to ask of Shaun Moran?
Yeah. So Shaun, I would ask you, I know you're driven. I know you're motivated. Obviously because of the success you've had. So I want to know, what's the silver lining in this experience for you? Like, what is it that you're taking from this you would have never gotten before having to go through this? What is your silver lining?
Oh my God, that is the perfect question for Shaun. That
Yeah.
literally is the perfect question,
Yeah.
because if there's someone who's going to have a silver lining, Shaun Moran is.
Oh, perfect. Good. Good.
Yeah,
I look forward to hearing what he has to say.
he is just awesome about that. So now, last question.
Yeah.
The whole Elevate Academy, what is this about? It's about advice. It's about learning. It's about trying to get people to want to go to the next level, to have different experiences, change things. That's what it's about, bringing in thought leaders that can literally help us in everything we do, business, school, you name it. So the question we have for you is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten, and who gave it to you?
Yeah, man, that's such a tough one. And what I'm going to tell you sounds maybe a little counterintuitive to some of the stuff that I've even said today. But my advisor, when I was working on my PhD program, he and I started a program in the athletic department at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville for the student athletes and coaches, where we were getting to work with them and starting mental training and sports psychology program with them. And boy, I was invested in it, and I was going at it really hard. And I kept coming back to him and saying to him, man, I love that we're doing this with these people, but what about these people? These people aren't buying in. What do we do to get them to buy in? And what do we do to get them to buy in? And I kept focusing on them. And at some point he said, Greg, you're so focused on these guys that you're ignoring the people that want to work with you. You're ignoring these people. And so he said, at some point, you got to go with the goers. And I know that sounds really simplistic, and it sounds really like you give up, but I think from a leadership standpoint that you want to give your energy and you want to provide that as much as you can. But at some point, you got to think about where you're putting your energy, and you got to make sure that you're going with the goers. And don't focus so much on trying to get the people that aren't buying in too much, so that you're not being able to spend time on the people that are with you.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you two quick ones off of that, which is amazing. Is I got invited into a program a couple of years ago that U.S. Lacrosse was running, and they brought in someone who had worked with the U.S. Olympic teams in creating not only the culture, but how do you get the most out of the best athletes in the Olympics?
Yeah.
One of the things that he talked about was make sure you're working with your top athletes. They're going to be the ones who, especially in team sports, they're going to be the ones who are going to have the most impact on your team.
Yeah.
So you're working with them. And then when I was at Merrill, one of my old time mentors, who was probably like 78 years old at the time, he said to me, there are three types of people at Merrill Lynch. There are the people who make it happen. There are the people who watch it happen. And there are people who said, hey, what just happened? He said, focus on group number one.
Yes, that's right. Yep, that's exactly right.
So listen, this is awesome.
Thanks for having me.
I love you so much. You're just the best. You have such a great energy about you. And you're changing the way people look at this. You changed my behaviors. You changed parents' behaviors, athletes. So for all of you out there, go look up Greg Dale, find his books, read his books. It's amazing stuff. I will tell you, you've had an impact on my daughter, Victoria, who's a coach. I know you came down to Friends Academy on Long Island and spoke to all their coaches. So if you want to get a great speaker to come out to something you haven't, Greg's the guy. He's just as genuine as you get, and we just appreciate you coming on to the Elevate Academy and elevating all of us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been an honor.
Well, listen, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job. Thanks so much, Greg, and we'll stay in touch and see you soon, bud.
Take care. All right.
Have a great one.
Bye.